Why did a child raised in a palace become one of the most feared rulers in history? The answer lies in his childhood. What Ivan the Terrible experienced in his early years could break anyone. He was left alone early on and quickly realized, in this world, the one who strikes first wins. Ivan was only 3 years old when his father, Grand Duke Vasily III, died. Power passed to his mother, but not for long. 5 years later, she died under mysterious circumstances. There were rumors that she was poisoned. Little Ivan was left an orphan in the literal sense. No one really cared for him. He lived in luxurious chambers, but he was like a shadow among the adults who were in his way. Do you know what the future Tsar entertained himself with? Not toys. He plucked feathers from live birds, tortured dogs and cats. According to eyewitnesses, Ivan threw cats off high towers just for fun. This is not just cruelty. It is the cry of a child who was not given love and stability. This is how Ivan the Terrible remembered the world, cruel, full of betrayal. When he was 13 years old, he showed for the first time who was in charge. One of the boyars dared to cross him. Ivan ordered that man to be thrown to the hungry dogs. It was not an emotional outburst. It was a conscious decision. The teenager, brought up in fear and chaos, began to act according to his own rules. He realized early on that if you don't kill, they will kill you. So he chose the path of power, control, and fear. He began to build a reality around him where he was a god and everyone else was either a subordinate or an enemy. The power that fell into the hands of an abused child became a weapon of destruction. Thus began a new chapter of his life, a chapter in which the boy who was ignored turned into the first real czar in Russia, not just a ruler, but a figure almost sacred. Before Ivan, there were no czars in Russia. There were great princes, they ruled, but their power was limited by boyars, church, traditions. This was not enough for Ivan. He wanted not just to command, he wanted to be feared, obeyed, and honored as a messenger of God. And he found a way to achieve this. In 1547, Ivan was only 16 years old. It was then that he took a step that changed Russian history. He insisted that he not just be recognized as a prince, but be crowned king. Thus he became the first official czar in Russian history. The word tsar came from Caesar, that is, he put himself on a par with Roman emperors and Byzantine rulers. At the coronation itself, there was an episode that says more about him than dozens of books. Ivan himself put on the royal crown and then demanded that even the priests bow to him as God on earth. This was not a whim. It was a clear message. From now on, power is only in his hands, and no one has the right to challenge it. When Ivan became czar, he was given the right to judge, execute, dispose of lands and armies, without the consent of the boyars. He abolished the old restrictions and began to build a country where he was the center of everything. He invented symbolism, style, rituals, everything to make the people believe that before them was not just a man, but a special chosen one. Images of the king with a halo appeared. His name was heard in churches alongside the name of Christ. So Ivan didn't just become king. He created a new model of power where there was no room for doubt or dialogue. He used religion as an instrument of personal power long before the term ideology was coined. His coronation was not about power, but about fear. He made sure that no one dared to say no. But even absolute power did not give Ivan the most important thing: peace inside. He had achieved everything: title, power, worship. But his heart remained empty, until she appeared in his life, the only person who truly cared for him. Her name was Anastasia. She became his first wife. She was not a princess, did not belong to a noble family, but she became the first official wife of Ivan IV. He chose her himself at the bride show, where girls from all over Russia were presented at court. Ivan was about 17 years old when he saw her. Quiet, modest, with a kind look, she immediately stood out against the background of others. At first glance, a simple woman, but it was she who played a huge role in the fate of the cruelest ruler of Russia. And while she was near, Ivan was restrained. Historians note that the first 13 years of Ivan's reign, when Anastasia was alive, were the most stable. Less repression, more reform, care for the people, active diplomacy. She did not interfere openly in politics, but Ivan often consulted her. She was able to calm him down, to persuade him to postpone a cruel decision, to keep him from outbursts of rage. In her presence, he almost never shouted or threw tantrums. One could say that she was his inner balance, the last anchor keeping the king from madness. Anastasia bore him 6 children, but only 2 sons survived, Ivan and Fyodor. She cared for them personally, despite their status. She was respected by the people and feared in palace circles because they knew that she was the only person whose words the Tsar listened to without argument. But everything collapsed in 1560. Anastasia fell seriously ill and died. Ivan went mad with grief. He was sure she had been poisoned by the boyars to weaken him. And then the real madness began. Many historians assume that she really could be poisoned because at the court there was an active struggle for influence. The Tsar, who could execute hundreds of people without a shadow of a doubt, cried like a child. He blamed the boyars for her death and began to take revenge. It is after her funeral that Ivan turns into the very same terrible, a paranoid, cruel, and vengeful monarch. After her death, the Oprichnina began, a time of terror, torture, and mass executions. Oprichnina is when Ivan divided the country into 2 parts. In one, he ruled personally as he wished. The other was given to the boyars to rule. But the main point was different. He created his own army of killers and executioners, a group of fanatics loyal to him who were called Oprichniki. These men obeyed no one but the Tsar. They wore black robes and had a broom and a dog's head tied to the saddles of their horses. The broom was to sweep out traitors, and the dog's head was to tear for the king. It looked frightening, and it was supposed to be frightening. People fell to their knees at the sight of the Oprichniki and asked for mercy, even if they had done nothing. The Oprichniki raided, tortured, executed, without trial, no explanations. If someone was not faithful enough, his house was burnt down, his family was killed, his property was taken away. In Novgorod, on Ivan's orders, they carried out one of the worst sweeps. They suspected that the city wanted to go over to the Lithuanian side. They killed up to 60,000 people. People were drowned in the river. Babies were thrown into ice holes. Old people were tortured right in front of their children. And all this was done in the name of the Tsar, with his personal permission. Sometimes he watched the executions himself. Sometimes he participated. Ivan wanted total control. He believed that enemies were everywhere, and he was determined to destroy any threat, even if there wasn't one. He couldn't stop because he believed it was either him or them. Oprichnina was not just a political tool. It was the Tsar's personal psychotherapy turned into state policy. The more Ivan killed traitors, the more he himself believed in their existence. It was a vicious circle of fear and power. He never let Anastasia go. Years after her death, he ordered her coffin to be dug up and her body opened to find evidence of poisoning. It was a shocking decision, even for the times. But he didn't stop there. Ivan began to suspect everyone around him. Even after a while, he continued to blame those around him and take revenge. After that, he married 7 more times. In total, he had 8 wives, even though the church only allowed 3 marriages. Some of these women disappeared without a trace. 2 he ordered drowned for disobedience and uncleanness. Another was exiled to a monastery. Relations in the king's family became dangerous and unpredictable, like a mine under the throne. He no longer trusted anyone, not even his own children. His sons were brought up in fear, seeing wives change, courtiers disappear, their father becoming more and more not himself every day. But the worst tragedy in Ivan's family was yet to come. Ivan's worst enemy was not abroad, not among the boyars, not among the traitors. It was in his own family, more precisely in the person he had to protect most of all, his son, Tsarevich. Ivan was a copy of his father, intelligent, determined, active. He participated in the affairs of the state, traveled with his father on campaigns, was preparing to become the next tsar. But between them more and more often conflicts broke out. Ivan Sr. over the years became more and more suspicious and irascible, and the son began to argue with him more and more boldly. Their quarrels grew louder, their conversations more dangerous. One day the argument got out of hand. The Tsar went into his son's chamber, and he did not like that he stood up for his pregnant wife. Ivan the Terrible hit his daughter-in-law for 2 open clothes. The son stood up in defense. The scandal began. The Tsar's anger flared up instantly. He struck his son on the temple with a staff. The blow was severe, so much so that the Tsarevich collapsed to the floor and died a few days later in his father's arms. It's not a myth. It is recorded in the sources, and most importantly, we can still see the pain of this moment in Repin's famous painting. In it, Ivan the Terrible sits covered in blood, with crazed eyes, cradling his dead son in his arms. The Tsar outlived his son by 3 years. But after this incident, he finally broke down. He lost his heir, lost his family, lost his meaning. His youngest son, Fyodor, though he became Tsar, but he was weak and sick. So, with Ivan, a strong dynasty effectively ended. Ivan's worst execution was not a show of cruelty, but an accidental blow that killed his own son. Many people think Ivan the Terrible was cruel only to his own country, but in Europe he was feared no less than in Russia. There he became a real symbol of the threat from the East, unpredictable, ruthless, ready to do anything for power. At that time, Russia was just beginning to assert itself as a serious power. Ivan expanded its borders, carried out reforms, created a regular army. And now Europe suddenly saw that there was a ruler who not only ruled the country, but was ready to impose his will on everyone around him. Ivan was in active correspondence with European leaders, for example, with the English Queen Elizabeth I. At first, politely, he offered an alliance, trade, even considered the option of marriage. But later the tone of the letters changed. Ivan began to ask for political asylum in England, in case he had to leave Russia. He wrote that he was ready to become a ruler in a foreign land if suddenly everything in Russia collapses. For Europe it was in shock. The Tsar of a huge country asks for a spare throne. And with the German princes he was not ceremonious at all. In letters he directly threatened them with war, wrote that if someone gets in his way, will receive the wrath of God and the Russian sword. This is not diplomacy. This is a warning. Ivan's policy became a cause for real fear. In Germany, he was called no other than Tsar Killer. In Poland and Lithuania, he was regarded as the devil of hell. In England, a mysterious Oriental despot. He frightened Europe with his unpredictability. He could offer an alliance, and a week later, threaten execution. Ivan was the first Russian leader who began to form a scary image of Russia in the international arena. Behind the mask of a monster was a man who looked for a way to escape when he felt he was losing control. In letters to foreigners, he threatened the judgment of God, and at home he himself became increasingly afraid of that judgment. Ivan frightened Europe with the Russian sword, but he himself turned more and more to icons, monks, and prophecies. He felt that around him were enemies, and inside emptiness and fear. At some point it became clear Ivan was afraid not so much of people as of eternal punishment. He began to talk more and more often about God, sins, and the afterlife. He executed, threatened, terrorized. But Ivan the Terrible thought about God every day. His paranoia was not only about conspiracies, he was afraid of what awaited him after death. Hell for him was not a fairy tale, but a very real threat. On the outside, a cruel king, and inside, a man who couldn't forgive himself. Historians say that after each murder, Ivan went to pray. Sometimes he sent donations to monasteries on the same day. Sometimes he ordered prayers for the souls of the murdered. He wanted to atone, at least formally. But there were more and more prayers because there were more and more deaths. As the years went by, he began to write letters to the monks more and more often. In these letters, he explicitly called himself a sinful loon and a cursed murderer. He asked them to pray for him because he was afraid God would never forgive him. He believed that every sin brought him closer to hell, but he could not stop. He discussed hell, heaven, the afterlife with his clergy. He was interested in mysticism, prophecies, legends. He listened to elders who predicted his fate. Ivan wanted to find a way to persuade God to give him another chance, but he realized that what he had done was inevitable. He built churches, ordered icons, created monasteries. It wasn't just piety. It was an attempt to buy forgiveness. And the more terrible his actions became, the more he prayed. His fear of hell was not a weakness, but an indication that he realized everything, and that made him even more dangerous. Ivan prayed, sacrificed, repented, but the guilt would not let him go until the very end. He was afraid he wouldn't have time to atone for what he had done. The older he got, the more he shut himself in, the more he secluded himself, the more he talked about death. He knew that the reckoning was near, and it came unexpectedly. Not from his enemies, not on the battlefield or in court, but on a very ordinary evening when no one suspected anything. It happened on the 18th of March, 1584. Evening, silence, the Tsar's chambers. Ivan was sitting on the throne and playing chess with his crony, as if everything was calm. But suddenly he fell face down on the chessboard. He was picked up, but he wasn't breathing. It all happened in seconds, and that's when the rumors started. Many believed it wasn't just death from age or illness. The Tsar was only 53 years old. For that time, not a young man, but not an old man. And the main thing, at the autopsy of his remains centuries later, scientists found in the bones lethal doses of mercury. Suspicions fell on everyone, from boyars, tired of fear, to people from the inner circle who wanted to put a more controllable heir to the throne. There was a version even about the English. After all, Ivan negotiated with them, and himself hinted that he could leave the throne. Or maybe he was removed by his own people to prevent him from organizing a wave of executions again. After his death, the country was in turmoil. There was a crisis, a power struggle, and everything he had built over the years began to crumble. He was afraid of hell, but he couldn't escape. He wanted to control everything, and died when he was unarmed. The cruelest Tsar of Russia went quietly during a chess game, not even having time to make the last move. His death became a mirror of his entire life, sudden, frightening, and full of mystery. Ivan died unexpectedly, but the questions did not end with his life. He was feared, he was hated, he was honored, all at the same time. But time passed, the fear faded away, and one important topic remained. What did he leave behind? When people talk about Ivan the Terrible, opinions are sharply divided. Some call him a madman who drowned the country in blood. Others call him a great ruler who made Russia strong and independent. So who was he really? Let's start with the facts. Under Ivan, Russia's territory almost doubled. He conquered the Khanates of Kazan, Astrakhan, and Siberia, and opened the way to the east. What today is considered great territory began to take shape under him. These were not just conquests. He actually expanded the borders of the country and secured new lands for it. He was also the first to centralize power. Before him, every boyar felt like a little tsar in his own corner. Ivan broke that. Sometimes, literally. He began to create what would later be called a strong vertical of power. But at the same time, he was torturing, killing boyars, burning towns. Historians estimate that tens of thousands of people died during the Oprichnina. He trusted no one, not even his own children, and in the end he was left alone. Ivan the Terrible built a great power not as a father of the country, but as a master who was afraid to lose everything. Everything he gave Russia, new lands, centralized power, international ties, he gave at the cost of fear, pain, and blood. And centuries later, we still cannot unequivocally answer, was he a savior or a destroyer? Probably he was both. And what do you think about it? Write in the comments.